I'm Paula Toti. A killer in a high-profile case is scheduled to go free after serving only part.
It was Tuesday morning, May 17th, 2005, just a few days before Bob and Amy were to celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary. At approximately 5 a.m., a distressed call was placed to 911 from the Bosley residence. The dispatcher heard Amy's voice, filled with panic and urgency. Before she could finish explaining what was happening, the call abruptly ended, punctuated by a loud crashing noise. Attempts to reconnect were unsuccessful.
We obtained this letter written to the Kentucky Parole Board by Bobby Bosley's family. 3 pages of a painful plea to keep Amy Bosley in prison.
Disoriented, the property was secured and investigators began processing the scene. As daylight broke, more officers arrived, along with trained K-9 units and a helicopter. At that moment, law enforcement believed they were searching for a dangerous suspect who had fled into the surrounding woods. Inside the cabin, the situation became even more confusing. In the main bedroom, authorities discovered Bob. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. Robert Bob Bosley entered the world on August 2, 1962, in the peaceful community of Alexandria in Campbell County, Kentucky. The town, small and unassuming, was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, and neighbors looked out for one another. Bob grew up in a religious, tight-knit household, surrounded by his siblings, Deborah, Henry Jr., and James. Their parents worked hard to provide stability, emphasizing faith, discipline, and responsibility. Those who knew the Bosley family described their home as structured but loving, the kind of environment where children learned early the value of perseverance and self-reliance. Even as a child, Bob stood out. Teachers and family members remembered him as unusually driven, showing signs of a sharp intellect and a restless determination to shape his own destiny. Although much of his childhood remains undocumented, the stories that survived paint a consistent picture. Bob was not the type of kid content with an ordinary path. Before he was even old enough to legally sign contracts, he was already envisioning a future where he ran a business of his own and earned financial independence. His ambition, even then, was unmistakable. Bob's first steps into that vision were humble but strategic. He began cleaning chimneys and performing minor roof repairs, jobs that most teenagers might have avoided due to the physical labor involved. But Bob didn't shy away. He embraced the work, often putting in long days and offering fair prices that quickly won over local homeowners. His reputation grew one satisfied customer at a time. People admired his reliability, his politeness, and his willingness to tackle difficult tasks without complaint. Bob's one-man operation gradually transformed into a respected service known throughout the region. As the years passed, Bosley Roofing and Chimney Sweep of Alexandria was born. Not overnight, but through consistent effort and a carefully earned reputation. Under Bob's guidance, the company became known for high-quality workmanship, timely service, and a level of professionalism that set it apart from competitors. Word spread, and so did the business. What began with a single set of tools eventually became a thriving enterprise with employees, steady clients, and a growing profit margin. Success encouraged Bob to think even bigger. Once he had established financial stability through his roofing and chimney business, he branched into real estate. Property after property began to fall under his ownership until he controlled roughly 20 rental units. With this new stream of income, his wealth grew substantially. Soon, Bob was enjoying a lifestyle that few in Alexandria could match. He purchased sports cars, horses, a private airplane, and a large boat he frequently took out on the lake. He also amassed a collection of high-end firearms, viewing them more as luxury items and hobbies than necessities. It was during this period of prosperity that Bob met a young woman who would completely reshape his personal life. At one of his favorite local restaurants, he crossed paths with 18-year-old Amy Pave. Amy, also from Alexandria, came from far more modest beginnings. Born in 1969 to a hard-working but financially struggling family, Amy knew early on what it meant to stretch every dollar. Her father's battle with alcohol created instability at home, motivating her to break away from the patterns she grew up with and create a different future for herself. Despite her circumstances, Amy excelled academically. She graduated high school with top honors in 1986 and chose to study business at a community college partnered with Northern Kentucky University. To pay her tuition and cover her living expenses, she worked as a waitress. It was during one of her shifts that Bob first noticed her. Bob, already in his 30s, carried himself with confidence and charisma, traits amplified by his financial success. Amy, initially cautious around him, gradually became more comfortable as they talked. One conversation turned into several, and soon Bob began inviting her to his well-known lake gatherings. These parties, filled with music and laughter, showcased a side of Bob that not many people outside his circle saw. Over time, Amy transitioned from being a new face at the events to someone Bob genuinely cared about. Their relationship grew steadily, surprising some locals who viewed Bob as an unattainable bachelor. But Amy brought something different into his life: sincerity, warmth, and an eagerness to build a future. After 4 years of dating, the couple married, marking a turning point for Amy. She had gone from a life of limited opportunities to becoming the wife of one of the most successful businessmen in the county. Their family grew quickly. In 1996, their daughter Morgan was born, followed by their son Trevor 3 years later. Motherhood transformed Amy. Her earlier social life, the lake parties and lively evenings, faded naturally as she focused on raising her children. School events, doctor's appointments, and day-to-day parenting replaced her previous routines, and she embraced these new responsibilities wholeheartedly. Bob, meanwhile, continued expanding his business endeavors. But as his companies grew, administrative tasks such as taxes, payroll, and contractor management began to feel increasingly overwhelming. Bob disliked paperwork and the structure of office life. He preferred being outside, overseeing physical jobs, or spending weekends on his boat. Sometimes he disappeared for long stretches, not explaining where he had gone. Friends later noted that he seemed to be drifting, not necessarily in a harmful way, but in a manner that suggested he was wrestling internally with the balance between work, freedom, and family life. Some acquaintances even speculated that he and Amy might have had an unconventional approach to their marriage, though nothing was ever confirmed. Eventually, Bob chose to blend his personal and professional worlds more closely. Since Amy had training in business administration, he asked her to take over the financial and organizational responsibilities of his company. She hesitated at first, aware of the pressure and accountability involved, but ultimately agreed. From that point on, Amy managed payroll, handled tax filings, organized invoices, and ensured the company remained compliant and efficient behind the scenes. Despite any private tensions or lifestyle differences, the Bosleys appeared from the outside to be flourishing. They lived in a rustic log cabin tucked into the wooded hills south of Alexandria, a temporary residence while their dream home was under construction nearby. The new estate, sprawling across 14 acres, was designed to be a showpiece, complete with stained glass windows, a stone tower, and Gothic-style gargoyles that gave the property a dramatic, almost storybook appearance. To neighbors and community members, the Bosleys looked like the embodiment of achievement: successful, prosperous, and living a life many aspired to. To anyone looking from the outside, the Bosley family seemed to have achieved a level of balance and prosperity that few households ever reach. Bob and Amy were attractive, active in the community, and widely known for giving back. They volunteered at school events, helped organize church functions, and often stepped in whenever neighbors needed an extra set of hands. Bob, in particular, had gained a reputation for being charitable. Despite running a busy company, he regularly donated repair services to low-income families who couldn't afford essential home maintenance. Over the years, this generosity built him a reputation as someone who genuinely cared for the community's well-being. Yet, as often happens in stories where everything looks perfect, there was a side to the Bosleys' life that wasn't visible from the outside. Beneath the image of harmony and success, subtle cracks had begun to form. These cracks were not immediately obvious, but they quietly expanded over time. What most people didn't know was that Amy, through her role as the company's administrator, had access to every financial corner of the business. She handled payroll, managed invoices, oversaw budgets, and monitored tax obligations. And because Bob trusted her deeply, perhaps more than he trusted anyone else, he didn't question her control over these processes. While Bob focused on expanding the business, working long days, and juggling the lake outings and the construction of their elaborate dream home, Amy began slipping into a pattern that would eventually unravel everything. Under the surface, and without Bob's knowledge, she started redirecting company funds. Taxes that should have been paid to the government were quietly moved into a private account that only she had access to. Whether she initially intended to fix the situation later or believed she could simply keep buying time is unknown. But the pattern continued year after year. For a while, the deception remained unnoticed. But federal agencies are persistent, and the Internal Revenue Service had been monitoring the unpaid tax obligations. They issued multiple letters, made calls, and attempted to schedule meetings to address the mounting issue. However, none of these warnings ever reached Bob. Every IRS communication had been rerouted by Amy to a private mailbox she alone controlled. She was fully aware that oversight from the authorities was tightening, yet she continued trying to delay the inevitable, perhaps hoping the problem would somehow resolve before it reached a critical point. Everything came to a sudden turning point on Tuesday morning, May 17, 2005, just days before Bob and Amy were set to celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary. At approximately 5 a.m., a distressed call was placed to 911 from the Bosley residence. The dispatcher heard Amy's voice, filled with panic and urgency. Before she could finish explaining what was happening, the call abruptly ended, punctuated by a loud crashing noise. Attempts to reconnect were unsuccessful. Within minutes, emergency responders were on their way to the Bosleys' remote cabin. When authorities arrived, they found Amy in a state of shock, disoriented and trembling. Her sister soon joined her, providing emotional support while officers took Amy to the station for questioning. The property was secured, and investigators began processing the scene. As daylight broke, more officers arrived, along with trained K-9 units and a helicopter. At that moment, law enforcement believed they were searching for a dangerous suspect who had fled into the surrounding woods. Inside the cabin, the situation became even more confusing. In the main bedroom, authorities discovered Bob's body. The discovery brought more questions than answers, especially when investigators noted that the number of shell casings in the room did not match the severity of the situation. Only 2 casings were found, an unusually small amount that suggested the scene might not be as straightforward as it first appeared. Instead of clarifying the event, the initial evidence created inconsistencies that puzzled detectives. The rest of the house added even more complications. Aside from the children's bedrooms, nearly every room appeared to have been disturbed. Kitchen cabinets were left wide open, even those under the sink, a location that made little sense for someone searching for valuables. The rear door showed signs of forced entry with a broken window, yet most of the broken glass was strangely located outside rather than inside, contradicting the direction the break should have produced. As investigators moved from room to room, the disorder seemed less like hurried searching and more like deliberate staging. In the bathroom, a mirrored cabinet stood open with various items scattered across the floor. Prescription bottles lay toppled in ways that suggested placement rather than frantic rummaging. The inconsistency of the scene raised doubts among the crime scene technicians. If the intruder had fled quickly, as Amy's incomplete 911 call indicated, why would they have spent time turning the house upside down? While forensic teams analyzed the property, detectives focused their attention on Amy at the station. Her emotional state shifted between moments of distress and periods of confusion. She attempted to describe the alleged intruder, identifying him as a white male who spoke with a nasal tone. Amy claimed he had broken into the house unexpectedly during the night and attacked both her and Bob before escaping. When detectives pressed her on whether anyone might have held resentment toward Bob, Amy pointed toward conflicts in his professional life. She suggested that Bob's confidence and reputation might have made him the target of jealousy or frustration. she specifically mentioned Noah Heim, a longtime friend of Bob who had recently argued with him over work-related matters. However, Noah was quickly eliminated as a suspect. He had a reliable alibi and was visibly devastated upon hearing the news. His grief was genuine and unmistakable. News of the incident spread rapidly through Alexandria. The small community, accustomed to quiet days and predictable routines, found itself gripped by fear and disbelief. Schools closed for several days as a precaution, and parents struggled to reassure their children. It was nearly impossible for residents to accept that someone as universally liked as Bob, a man who had donated his time, resources, and labor countless times, could have been harmed in his own home. The idea that a dangerous person might be hiding somewhere nearby only deepened the tension. Back at the Bosley cabin, investigators continued their meticulous search for answers. Although the bedroom had revealed only 2 shell casings near Bob's body, detectives knew instinctively that the evidence did not align with the story of a sudden break-in. Hoping to uncover something the initial sweep may have missed, they broadened their search to other parts of the home. Their instincts paid off. In the basement laundry room, officers discovered the family's washing machine still filled with water and soaked clothing. When they examined the clothing more closely, they found something that immediately shifted the tone of the investigation. At the very bottom of the washer sat a small folded piece of cloth. When detectives opened it, they discovered 4 additional shell casings wrapped carefully inside. The discovery raised an obvious but troubling question. Why would an intruder, supposedly in a panic, take time to stash critical evidence inside an appliance in the victim's own home? The scenario stretched credibility thin. The oddities didn't stop there. Close to the washing machine lay an aluminum baseball bat. It showed fresh scratches and faint white residue on its surface. While it was unclear whether the bat played any role in the incident, its condition didn't match the rest of the basement. Investigators collected it for laboratory testing, hoping it would provide insight into whether it had been used to create damage elsewhere or staged as part of a misleading scene. For the moment, Amy was allowed to leave the station and reunite with her children. Investigators wanted to avoid distressing them further and believed they needed more evidence before making any major decisions. However, the details emerging from the cabin painted a picture that troubled the detectives. Much of the home had been left in dramatic disarray, yet certain valuables, including noticeable stacks of cash, remained undisturbed. If a thief had truly broken in, their behavior seemed strangely selective. Furthermore, several investigators noted that Amy's emotional reactions felt inconsistent. Although she appeared distressed, her expression showed little genuine sorrow. Experienced detectives recognized the signs of a person struggling more with maintaining a story than coping with a loss. The case soon took a dramatic turn. Officials from the Internal Revenue Service arrived at the station after hearing news of Bob's passing. They explained they had been urgently trying to contact him for months regarding a serious and rapidly escalating issue. According to their records, the company owed more than $1.7 million in unpaid taxes, a number so large it could not be ignored. In fact, a formal meeting between Bob and IRS representatives had been scheduled for the very day he was found deceased. A significant coincidence investigator could not overlook. The IRS agents also shared another shocking detail. On a previous occasion, when they called to speak with Bob about the overdue tax obligations, someone answered claiming to be him. However, the voice on the line was noticeably unusual. It sounded higher in pitch than expected, almost strained, as though the speaker was forcing a tone that did not come naturally. To the agents, it had the distinct quality of a woman attempting to mimic a man's voice. Once investigators replayed this information against what they now suspected, they concluded the caller was almost certainly Amy. With this revelation, a possible motive emerged with alarming clarity. Amy, who had been entrusted with full control over the company's finances, had apparently diverted large sums of money for her own use, redirecting tax payments into private accounts. Bob, unaware of the financial manipulation unfolding behind the scenes, was just days away from learning the truth. With a scheduled IRS meeting approaching, Amy may have believed her actions were moments from exposure. Complicating the marriage further were rumors of Bob's personal behavior. According to his sister, she had once overheard Amy make a remark during a moment of frustration, saying that if Bob ever cheated or left her, she would retaliate. At the time, the comment seemed like nothing more than a heated exaggeration, the sort of thing said flippantly in an argument. But in the context of new evidence, investigators revisited that memory with much greater concern. Despite the mounting evidence, Amy continued to deny any involvement when brought in for a second interview. She emphasized her love for Bob, acknowledging that their marriage was imperfect, but no worse than anyone else's. She insisted she had no reason to harm the father of her children and that she too wished for justice. Yet the details she provided were vague, inconsistent, and often contradicted earlier statements. Meanwhile, forensic work progressed rapidly. Ballistics testing brought another crucial finding. All 6 projectiles associated with the case, the 2 in the bedroom and the 4 hidden in the washing machine, had been fired from the same firearm. This contradicted any notion of a chaotic intruder fleeing the scene and strongly suggested deliberate concealment. Investigators also examined the physical injuries Amy claimed were inflicted during a struggle. She showed scratches on her upper body and described them as defensive wounds. But medical examiners noted something unusual. The scratches appeared too symmetrical and clean to have resulted from a chaotic altercation. Instead, they looked more like marks intentionally created to resemble an attack. Even her blouse, which she said had been torn during the struggle, showed precise cuts consistent with scissors. From there, the fabric had been manually ripped to simulate damage. Less than 2 weeks after Bob's death, authorities concluded they had enough evidence to make an arrest. Amy Bosley was taken into custody and charged with her husband's homicide. One lingering uncertainty remained: the location of the firearm used. The discovery of the weapon would become a point of debate. One version of events claimed police found a handgun from Bob's personal collection hidden inside Amy's handbag, tucked behind a wardrobe. Another version suggested Amy's sister had custody of Amy's belongings that night and discovered the gun while sorting through her purse. According to that account, she immediately contacted a lawyer who advised turning the weapon over to authorities. Regardless of which account was accurate, ballistics experts confirmed the firearm's link to the shell casings. Although the projectiles recovered from Bob's body were too damaged for a perfect match, everything else pointed in one direction. As the trial neared, prosecutors developed a clear and methodical narrative. Their argument was straightforward. For years, Amy had quietly drained the company's finances, diverting funds and allowing unpaid taxes to spiral out of control. For years, Amy Bosley had managed to keep the Internal Revenue Service at a distance through a combination of redirected mail, selective explanations, and a carefully crafted illusion of control. But by the spring of 2005, that illusion had begun to crumble. The unpaid tax amount had ballooned to an alarming level, and IRS agents were no longer satisfied with letters or postponed meetings. They wanted answers directly from Bob. On the morning of May 17, 2005, Bob was scheduled to meet with the agents face-to-face. The consequences of that meeting were obvious. The financial deception would be uncovered, their business would be in jeopardy, and their marriage, already strained by rumors, resentment, and emotional distance, would likely collapse. Amy understood the severity of what was coming. Exposure meant not only the loss of her comfortable lifestyle, but the very real possibility of criminal charges, divorce, and prison time. The stakes had never been higher. It was under this intense pressure that Amy, once admired as a devoted mother and active community volunteer, devised a plan that investigators would later describe as both desperate and tragically misguided. With her children asleep nearby and her husband unaware of the looming confrontation with the IRS, she quietly retrieved one of Bob's firearms from his personal collection late that night. What happened next would become the subject of extensive forensic analysis and courtroom reconstruction. Investigators later concluded that Bob was initially injured but not incapacitated. He awoke, confused and in pain, attempting to stand and confront the attacker in the dimly lit bedroom. The trajectory patterns of the projectiles suggested he moved toward the source of danger, likely expecting an intruder. Only in those critical moments did he realize the weapon was in the hands of someone he trusted most. According to experts, the struggle was brief. Bob was disoriented, stunned, and unable to stop the situation from escalating. The second shot ended the confrontation. By dawn, the man who had worked tirelessly to build a thriving company and provide for his family was gone. And the woman who had once stood by his side, admired by friends, praised by neighbors, and seen as a pillar of her community, was now entangled in a sequence of events that would forever alter the course of her family's life. What remained was not only a grieving community, but a narrative of deception and desperation that no one could have predicted. With Bob gone, Amy moved forward with the next stage of her plan. To support the claim of a violent break-in, she used a baseball bat to break the rear glass door, knowing the fractured glass would make the supposed escape route seem plausible. She opened cabinets and drawers throughout the house, scattering items across floors to imitate a frantic burglary. Then she collected 4 spent casings from the scene, wrapped them in cloth, and hid them at the bottom of the family's washing machine beneath wet clothing. Her blouse, presented as torn during a struggle, was found to have been cut first with scissors and then ripped by hand to create an uneven but deliberate appearance. After setting the scene, she placed a tense, frantic call to 911, ending it abruptly to amplify the sense of chaos. But as investigators examined the evidence, the carefully crafted illusion began to fall apart. Laboratory testing revealed that tiny glass fragments on the aluminum baseball bat precisely matched those from the shattered rear door. The bat itself belonged to the family, undermining the claim that an intruder had used it. Furthermore, the property surrounding the home showed no signs of forced movement, no unusual footprints, tire marks, or disturbances of any kind. The description Amy provided of the supposed intruder yielded no leads. No one matching the characteristics she gave was seen entering or leaving the vicinity. As detectives continued uncovering inconsistencies, they also learned more about the tension within the Bosley marriage. Amy had harbored suspicions of infidelity, and evidence later retrieved from the couple's safe, including photographs from social gatherings at Lake Cumberland, suggested Bob had engaged in at least one relationship outside the marriage. These discoveries heightened the emotional complexities behind the case, but were not, by themselves, sufficient to explain what had occurred. Investigators believed the financial motive remained the central driving force. The financial records told a sobering story. Amy had misdirected almost $2 million in company funds by failing to pay taxes and quietly diverting the money to other accounts. With the IRS meeting scheduled for the morning after the incident, time had run out. If Bob had attended that appointment, the hidden financial crisis would have been revealed in full. Amy believed that by eliminating Bob, she could shield herself from exposure, settle the debt with his assets, and regain control of the narrative. During the investigation, the defense attempted to introduce doubt. They argued that the shell casings found at the scene could have originated from Bob's pockets after a routine visit to the shooting range, and they emphasized the absence of eyewitnesses or DNA conclusively tying Amy to the act. Their strategy hinged on creating just enough ambiguity to sway a jury toward reasonable doubt. However, the emotional weight of the case and the potential trauma facing the children influenced the direction of the legal process. To avoid placing them in that position and to ensure the case reached a resolution, prosecutors offered Amy a plea agreement. She would avoid a lengthy trial and accept responsibility, receiving a reduced sentence in exchange. Yet one lingering mystery remained. Despite the extensive financial investigation, Amy never disclosed what she had done with the missing millions. On November 2, 2006, the atmosphere inside the Campbell County courtroom was tense, heavy, and solemn. Dozens of people filled the rows: family members, reporters, local residents who had followed the case from the beginning, and officials who had worked tirelessly investigating the events that had shaken their quiet community. In the center of it all, escorted by deputies, was Amy Bosley. Dressed in a green and white prison-issued jumpsuit, she walked into the courtroom with a slow. Before the judge addressed sentencing, the courtroom turned its focus to the people who had been most deeply affected by Bob Bosley's death: his family. He condemned the extent of the harm Amy had caused, not only to her husband, but to her own children, who had lost their father and effectively their mother at the same time. He spoke about the broader community, which had been shocked and saddened by the case, and about the personal future Amy had thrown away through deception and desperation. He then announced her sentence: 20 years in prison. Under Kentucky law, with the requirement that violent offenders serve 85% of their sentence, Amy would need to complete 17 years before becoming eligible for release.